today I'm very happy to share with you some of the lessons we've learned in the last quarter, let's say in the last 4 or 5 months, when preparing proposals for Horizon Europe 2026 calls. Martel, I will tell you a few words about Martel. Martel is an SME that is based in Switzerland, but with offices not only in Switzerland, in Zurich and Chiasso, but also in Amsterdam. We have a European-based subsidiary in the Netherlands. We have about 30 years of experience in Horizon in EU-funded projects. We were born in 1996, so this year we celebrated our 30th birthday, and we have grown in terms of diversity of services that we cover, competences, people that are on board. So we have essentially about 54, 55 people working across Switzerland and the Netherlands, and we help writing proposals, but we also participate to many projects as partners. And what we do as partners can be different according to the different project. So let me give you a few words about this. Especially in the last 10-15 years, we have been growing different skills. We have a team that is more doing project coordination and project management, so the more traditional activities that we had here in Martel. But in the last 7-8 years, we also developed a team that is specialized on cascade fundings and open calls management. You might be familiar with this instrument because it's also increasingly used in order to attract third parties and in order to extend and enlarge consortium. Then we have a team that is working more on technical, social-technical activities, also economic activities. That is a team dedicated to policy, to exploitation, but also to community building, communication, and dissemination. Maybe some of you in the audience have worked already with us. And last but not least, we also have a technical team. We have about 12, 13 people that are working on research and development kind of activities across several domains. We have a very strong ICT DNA. We start as telco, electrical, AI engineers, but of course nowadays we work across a number of domains, in particular smart cities, smart mobility, but also healthcare, virtual worlds, sustainability, climate change, and you name it. Now, I put these numbers just to qualify a little bit me as a speaker and Martel as a partner in this arena. So in Horizon Europe, that, as you know, started in 2021 with some delays in the calls because of the COVID situation and the delay with the first publications. We've submitted quite a few proposals by now. We have won 55 plus. I wrote plus because there are some one-stage proposals that we know they passed, but we don't know yet if the second stage will pass. Since beginning of this year, we have already submitted about 50 for some of these are first stage proposals. Again, that's why I put this 50 plus. Now, what we want to do today is to share some of the lessons we have learned. You might have been attending our first webinar in January, in which we were anticipating what it's important to do in order to be competitive, given the major changes with 2026 and 2027 Horizon Europe calls. And now let's see what we've learned after this first wave. So, in this slide, I summarize some of the main points, but you can download the more extensive slides from January, in which you will see all the kind of changes that happened. And, you know, some 3 macro aspects that I would like to remind are the following. First of all, the templates have changed. So now there is a reduction. typically on the length of the proposals, which is something that does not need to be underestimated, because very often what we can write easily in 50 plus pages, it's more difficult to write when you have less pages. Now, another big change is that an increasing number of calls are lump sum kind of proposals. Calls. What does it mean? It means that basically you have to identify and encapsulate within the first reporting period a set of activities in work packages, so that the work is finished and the payment for this work can basically be claimed from the Commission already when the first reporting period is over. What happens is that there is less bureaucracy, less reporting overhead with this kind of projects, but when you write the proposal, you have to split the work in work packages that have different durations so that you can get paid along the way. And also the lump sum budget, it's much more, I would say it's more tricky to be put together at proposal preparation time, especially because many organizations are not yet reasoning in those terms. And so also for the PM rates of different categories, we experienced some delays in the partners providing us this information. The other main change that I think we should all keep in mind is the way the calls are written. So the length of the call text has decreased, but also if you compare the text of the calls in 2026 or also of the 2027 that have already been announced, you will notice that they are shorter and less prescriptive. So while in the past, until 2025 calls, it was very clear what should be the objectives, what should be the delivery, how, even the how you should get there was somehow indicated in the calls themselves. Now it's a much different story. It's much less prescriptive, and so it's the consortium that has to elaborate the right methodology, the right approach, and have to be very convincing about the whole story that you tell. Now, these were the changes. How did we deal with that? I will discuss this today with you. Now, clearly, I guess we are all aware about this over-submission crisis, we call it like this, right? At least with the 2026 close calls. Maybe not of you are aware, I just tell you, if you go on the portal, in the page of the specific call that you have addressed, there is in the update information also typically the statistics, so the total number of proposals that have been received for that call. This can give you a sense, very precise sense, of what is the probability that your proposal will be accepted or not, given that the budget is known upfront, the number of proposals that the EC will select is known, and so you can calculate this probability. It's pretty, there's a big change. So the average baseline was was around 15%. With lower percentages for the ICT. It was always historically around 10–11%. Now, what we looked at when putting together these slides were the statistics that have been published by HDA and by the European Commission on the portal. So these numbers are based on European Commission data. So we had a look at cluster 2. There the average, it's roughly around 15%. So compared to cluster 4, where the forecast is 5.2%, it's still pretty interesting. But overall, the fact that there are less calls and more proposals submitted, especially because of the Gen AI effect, which will come in a second, it's of course creating an overwhelming situation. Also in cluster 6, environment and bioeconomy, the recent calls have seen a peak in submission. More than 1,100 proposals have been submitted, which brought the expected success rate down to an average of 10%. Remember, this is an average because in a cluster you have a number of calls, but for some specific call, the average is sometimes below 1%, given the extreme high amount of proposals that have been submitted. Now, because of our DNA and our experience, I would like to share with you a little bit more insight into cluster 4. So cluster 4 is the cluster, usually the ICT cluster, in which you have digital and industry kind of calls, right? And in space. Space has not been open yet. The calls are open for submissions in autumn. So we looked at the digital and industry side. So in the digital calls, that are the ones clustering data, IoT, AI, next generation internet, or open internet stack, there was a total amount of 312 full proposals submitted and 639 industry single stage submitted. The fact that the number of calls decreased and the number of proposals increased, of course, made it so that now the calculation are given in this slide, and they are reported that out of the 639 submitted, basically only 72 have been selected for funding. And for the digital, it's going to be even worse. The results will probably be submitted within the next, well, between July and August. Of course, there's a certain pressure on the Commission to deliver evaluation as soon as possible in order to minimize the delays that in some sectors Europe might accumulate if projects start later. So now let me give you a walk through what were the main lessons learned on our side. Okay, so first of all, when we started in January, February, or even earlier, actually, even in December, to work on new proposals, clearly what happened is that we had some very good ones from 2025, and some of our partners as well proposed to change and modify those proposals. I guess many of you or some of you might have been in the same situation, to reshape them and resubmit them. What was a very big surprise for us is that some of the partners or some of these consortia didn't use the right template from the very beginning. So already to reuse a proposal as it is, it's a big risk and can be a big mistake, because every call is new in the focus, in the expected impact, in the kind of overall relevance to several factors. But what was very striking for us is that many organizations continue to use the old template. So in this case, what we did in Martel was already from January, we prepared templates according to the guidelines, so the new version 5.0 template. But then at the beginning of each submission, we double-checked by downloading from the portal what is the template for that specific call. There could be some differences, especially in the indication, in the text that you find in italics. There are indications that sometimes applies to a call and sometimes not, like social science relevance or gender related aspects. There's a few things that we notice are different. So that's a very important point. Another point that is very important is that since now we have to write the same story, or even a better story with less pages, to write endlessly and just swallow text in the proposal and wait in the last 24 or 48 hours to just reduce and shrink to 40, it's a very bad idea. It's a very bad idea because you risk to cut out some essential parts and you risk to miss some others. But what is even more difficult is to control the flow of the narrative. And how you convey the message is really key now that the calls are less prescriptive. So our recommendation is please do, a very simple thing: download your templates, or adapt the ones that you had to the new guidelines. In Martel, we have enriched and used in some of our proposals templates that we have enriched after having analyzed about, I think, 390 or 400 evaluation summary reports that we received in the last couple of years. Knowing that now the evaluation guidelines, given that the templates have changed, are slightly different. So what we did was to identify the most common negative comments for different parts or different sections. And now we have embedded in our templates this kind of reminders, or even some pieces of text that help not to miss the point. Now, let's stay a little bit, before I was talking about template and at the same time a little bit about resubmission, I would like to say a few more words about resubmission. Because of course, nowadays, especially with Gen AI, we all feel quite confident that, to reshape 40, 50 pages is not a big deal. I think that this is absolutely wrong, especially because nowadays with this less prescriptive approach, you really have to make sure that the methodology that is at the core of your excellence section is strong, clear, and all well connected to the rest of the proposal. I make you an example here. In this resubmission, it can happen that you pass from a proposal where you didn't have open calls to a proposal in which you have open calls. So this is a fundamental change. It is a fundamental change that impacts not only the budget and the way you distribute money, it impacts the way you organize your work, because you have to show and demonstrate at methodology level, so already in section 1, how to have open calls, to add third parties will have an impact on the flow of your technical, scientific, technological activities. Now, there is a point that I would like to stress, and we will come back to that about section 2.1 in the next slide. Maybe some of you that are familiar with proposal writing will remember that basically some sentences were repeated, or similar sentences and paragraphs were repeated a number of times in the proposal in section 1, then you would find in section 2.1, or in section 3 in the word packages description. And the logic behind the changes of the templates and of the changes of the codes that the Commission tries to enforce is that they want to avoid this, and they want to reduce the space so that you just say the essential ones for all, where it's the right place. So what was also very verbose and opaque was the way in which some proposal would argue that from specific results, they would get to certain impact at the end of after the project. So now what the new templates try to enforce is the fact that you have to look at key performance indicators in relation to your objectives in section 1, and that you have to look at key impact pathways, key IP. So even here you see the level of confusion, in order to argue how you will pass from results to outcomes to impact. Something that I would like to say, sometimes, you don't find in the call text the expected impacts, but you have to read the expected impacts for the destinations that these calls belong to, because they are typically specified there. And if not, there are always impacts that are the Horizon Europe strategic plan. There are 9 official key impact pathways. So you have to argue along these very specific points. And in this respect, try to separate the key performance indicators in section 1 that relate typically to the objectives, right, with the impact canvas in section 2.1 that has to explain precisely how you will pass from results to outcome to impact in relation to what is written in the EC documents. And this is a sort of, I mean, you have to follow a clear logic, I think. And when your logic is clear, then you can be convincing, of course. Now, about the lump sum. So about the lump sum, we mentioned before that basically there is, well, lump sum are great at execution time because there is less overhead in reporting, less detailed reporting for financial aspects. I mean, it's a much leaner structure. On the other hand, now half of the 2026 call budgets are lump sum. Which means that when you prepare your proposals, you have, first of all, to estimate different categories for a person month's cost, and you can adjust them, of course, later on at project execution time, but you have to basically do this exercise, which not all organizations have done if they have the older approach to traditional approach to proposal writing. And I would say that what is very important for you to understand is that the payment is strictly tied to the 100% completion of a work package. So if one of the partners fail one task, basically the entire work package payment is delayed or blocked. So it's very important to decide which tasks and at which level of granularity you break your period, right? So minimizing the risks that some activities might block the final completion of a work package planned work. What I would like also to say is that it's very difficult. Well, it's very difficult. It's a bit more complex, no? So we have our own adapted Excel sheets that do some calculation because the form that is done by the Commission for the lump sum, you know, we prefer not to touch it until the very end when we did all simulation on the budget and all sort of checks, and then we transfer it to this. This cannot be done in the last 48 hours, definitely. I mean, I know that correcting mistakes, of course, it's a must. So at any time a mistake is detected, even 2 hours, 1 hour before, it should be corrected. But here we're not talking about mistakes, we're talking about budget planning and budget distribution among partners. Now, let's come to the big elephant in the room. Gen AI, we all know that it has become, let's say, a quite interesting, useful, but at the same time, quite dangerous instrument. So the first point is the illusion that it creates. I must say myself, I've been rather relaxed in the last calls when compared to, you know, last year or when we used less or a couple of years ago, because in fact, writing has never been so easy, right? With Gen AI that is sort of there available for helping you to overcome the blank page sort of initial block that some of us might have. So, of course, it gives you a smooth way to start the writing. And also it creates what I call here the finished illusion. So at any time you think you are about to be finished, because it's easy to ask to shrink, or to ask to finish up, or to polish, correct the English. But actually, there are many times in which you might realize that the reality is totally different. Now, remember that also the number of proposals have increased. So this overproduction of proposals is also congesting the system, the portal. And in the last day or couple of days, maybe some of you or several of you have experienced that the system really becomes slower, and sometimes you might have problems uploading your proposal and submitting. So the reality is that GenAI cannot create the concept, cannot create the excellence, cannot create the foundation of your proposal if you do not have experts that clearly ground what it's all behind section 1 in particular. And sometimes you might have noticed that when you use GenAI, it produces a lot of blah blah, a lot of very nice poetic rhetoric sentences, but then first of all you have to cut them down, but also they do not come to the point of what it was all about. And sometimes there are also hallucinations, and there are not always precise statements. So that's very important. But there is also another very important point that I wanted to share with you. Unless you have professional licenses of common GenAI tools, if you use these GenAI tools to discuss about your proposals by giving them input on some maybe IPR covered materials, you risk really to run some legal and privacy risks. And remember that whatever you feed into GenAI tool, unless it's within a closed environment, will be input to others maybe working on the same kind of codes. Now, what's the solution? Of course, the human cannot be taken out of the loop. The human must guide and steer the whole process. So it has to, GenAI, it's an instrument, but it's assisting you, and it's not leading your thinking. So it should rather be that your thinking and your way of prompting the machine helps you to understand some of the aspects that need further discussion with the partners, that need further dig into the state of the art, and so on and so forth. So the expert team cannot be replaced by GenAI. And also, while you can do some good editorial work, you always have to reread, because you can never be sure that the way in which some sentences have been modified, or the way in which some words have been cut out of your sentences, modifies the meaning of what you have written. So very important to reread, reprompt, question, discuss with experts, and especially write the first, at least this is what we try to do, in the first, especially in the definition of the concept paper. We call it concept paper. So in the first weeks, we work on, not on the proposal template, but we work on a Word document that we share with our partners that is called concept paper. And this one should never, I mean, now never is maybe too much, but should not be put together by using GenAI. You have to give first your thoughts, your input, your scientific, technical knowledge, put it on the table and discuss with other experts. There is another point that I would like to share, and we would have to have a separate webinar just to discuss the double fire back of AI, of GenAI, because of the fact that now increasingly also the evaluators and the Commission are using GenAI in order to trim down and to evaluate proposals. And this is a double risk, because of course there might be proposals that are very well written formally, that if checked by GenAI would pass, but if checked by expert in the field would not. So a pre-screening done by GenAI is extremely dangerous. And therefore, this is a point to take into account. Now, The other point that I wanted to share with you, and I call it the cosmic consortium trap. I mean, this webinar came out of a post in LinkedIn that I shared, in which I really spontaneously wrote a few things just after the end of the big submission wave on our side. So the first point is that there are organizations, important organizations with big names, names also not only in terms of organization, but of individuals that are top people in their fields. But of course, if they are just there to provide a name, it's really not very useful, especially because some of these corporates or some of these big research institutions, they are in several proposals. So the effect of having these big names is sort of diluted or basically disappears when basically the same organization, but with the headquarters, with the subsidiaries in different countries, is in all proposals submitted. The other point is that if the very knowledgeable person, expert in that organization will not be involved in the proposal writing, or at least in reviewing the proposal at an early stage to indicate what needs to be changed and how changes must take place, of course, it's not helping in terms of achieving excellence. So it's very important that you have engaged people, engaged experts from the very beginning that you can pull in. They might not be needed the whole time in the writing phase. And we also write technical parts by pinging and discussing with these experts, right? So this is possible, but it is impossible to do something that is technically, scientifically, and technologically sound if you don't have experts on board. Now, there was another factor that for us was generating some overhead. The fact that now in many of the calls of 2026, there is an ownership and control declaration. So especially in cluster 4, there are several sensitive technologies and calls that are covered, and they are not open to third countries or organizations that might be controlled by third countries, or even countries that are not even in the scope of the EU funding. What does it mean? That basically you have to ask all partners, also the ones that have no ties with any other, organization outside of Europe, but you have to ask them for a declaration of ownership and control. And sometimes it takes a while, because for small organizations, it might be simple. For SMEs, you might have one owner or a few owners, and it's clear who is the ultimate beneficial owner. But in some cases, not. And in some cases, the person authorized to sign these forms is not someone that you can involve and engage easily. So it happened to us that in some proposals we were really waiting until the very end to get this declaration signed and duly integrated for submission. So make sure that you ask this early enough, that possibly you have all of them at least signed, at least 10 days, 8 days before submission, because at least you secure that this part will not delay the submission of your proposal. Now, the last couple of days, or typically deadlines, most of the deadlines have been historically on Tuesdays. Now there are so many that they are on Wednesday, Thursday, but the madness starts more or less on the weekend before the day, the week where there is the day of submission. And many of you, I'm sure, they know what I'm talking about. So, first of all, one thing that helps a lot to converge is the collaborative editing, but it's also a very delicate process, because when there are many people that are editing in parallel a document, you know that some formatting anomalies can happen, some text disappears, some new text is not tracked because the partners forgot to track the changes that they made. Then there is all of a sudden a partner that you've never heard about for 3 months that is asking you to change this or that, or that wants to put in the budget, I don't know how much for equipment or for whatever. And again, you never know when the portal will be reactive or not. So within 2 days, 2 days before the final submission, we try to submit one version of the proposal, whether it's complete, whether it's the very first version. Well, we try to submit one first version that is complete 2 days before submission. And then you can resubmit, and the new submission will override the previous one. And you can submit more than one time without any problem. So try to consider the fact that you have to have a sort of 2 days for a leading person or a master editor or the master team, in which only 3-4 people will edit the master document, produce the PDF, check that the PDF is in order, upload and submit. Of course, you can iterate this process, right? And so you can have revision from the consortium while you have secured early submission. So do not wait last minute. I shouldn't tell you this, but we have already submitted proposals for the first time at when the deadline is 17, 16, 49 seconds. It happened, I don't know, a couple of times. I don't remember exactly the seconds, but it was like a sort of quite extreme situation, which I would not recommend to anyone. So try really to submit the first complete version at least 2 days before the submission. Now, let me summarize the main lessons learned. And if you have questions, drop them in the chat. We'll try to use some of the time that we have to answer some of the questions, if we have the right answers. And so the summary, I'm checking the time. And the summary that I wanted to share with you is the following. I know that I repeated some of the messages several times, but it's sort of like, by repeating them, I feel like I also learned better what should become a mechanical reflex when writing proposal. And I love writing proposals. So one thing is, first of all, make sure that you know the rules. Make sure that you read the templates, that you read the call text, that you read the relevant documents that might be indicated in the call text or even in the portal of the Commission. And if you have doubt, try to contact experts, try to contact your department in your organization, or contact national contact points, but definitely try to make sure that you start from a clear and safe position. Then again, to bring together I always say to my colleagues that in the past, I always said that the consortium is about 70% of your success rate. Maybe this is too much, but I really think that when you work with trusted people that you know are committed to write, to help understand what is behind the concept. So I'm not saying just good English writer, right? I'm saying good people that can help translate also what sometimes technical experts are not used to put in the EC template format. So engage the experts that are behind the consortium early enough, especially because they might be very busy in some periods and then it doesn't work. Again, the logic is different. The logic with these less prescriptive calls means that your narrative is very important. So it's not just what you do and what you deliver, but it's how you will deliver it and what kind of impact it will have concretely. Try also to make sure that the obvious aspects like, Part A, admin details are all checked a few days before submission. And of course, if you think it's overwhelming and it's too much, you can always contact us and work with us. What I also wanted to say is that, of course, we all need luck, because when you think about the number of proposals submitted and the sort of average success rate expectation, it has become a little bit like playing a lottery. So nothing should be given for granted. Now, it's, what's the date today? I don't know. It's 21st of May. So the next big wave, it's gonna be September, October. So we have a few months to prepare ourselves, but there is summer in between. So what is absolutely important is that as of today, you have already identified what are the calls of relevance to your organization, to your work. You can look, there are basically two main blocks, at least for what concerns Horizon Europe. You have cluster 2, 5, 6, and the EU missions with deadline between September already, early September as well, and October. And then cluster 3, that is the security, and the cluster 5, energy and built environment, that is in November, and some of them in December. So try to schedule well. If the calls that you're interested in are distributed across different clusters, also the timing for working on the proposal writing, but also on the preliminary step, that is the consortium formation. Now, of course, with summer in between, it's quite risky and tricky to wait until July, August, because in July, August, many people are off, whether it's in your organization or in the partner's organization. You risk not to get answers, you risk not to have enough meat and input to put together a convincing story. So it's definitely important that you start already now to work on the consortium and on the core concept, and possibly by July or before the main takeoff of the team, you have already a solid foundation and work packages that are already assigned with clear tasks for everyone. Now, the temptation now, I guess, for all of us, is that because we have Gen AI and we think it's easy to adapt one proposal from one call to the other, might be that we spread a little bit too broadly the resources, the capacity that we have in-house, and we try to target different calls. These sometimes might be successful, but it's clearly a big risk. Because you risk to miss the point and to miss what exactly will make the difference in the different calls, because sometimes you need different partners. I mean, most of the times you need different partners for different calls, but also a different approach and a different story to get where you want to get. Now, as I mentioned before, we are doing this work now for many years, and what I wanted to say here, beyond any marketing and advert kind of thing, is that if you have to choose a partner that will lead or will help you putting together your proposal, it's important that you choose someone that has already experience, that has experience not only as proposal writer, but also as executor, as partner at project execution times. Because I think it's very risky to just have consultancy that provides, dedicated so-called grant or bid writers, but they have never been involved in the execution of the projects, because there are many aspects that you can better explain and better justify and better understand only if you have been part of the execution process. Now, there are many ways in which you can get prepared. There are trainings. I'm sure that you will participate in info days that are organized by the Commission or by the national contact points. What I wanted to say is that sometimes in the info days and in the matchmaking sessions, the people that are presenting are rather new, or they are not necessarily yet so much involved in the ecosystems for those specific calls. So it's always important, besides the people that you meet at this organization, that you meet at those matchmaking events, to always try to identify who are the main players in the ecosystem that is behind a certain call. Now, I think that what is very important is to understand that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And the key word here is preparation, because we have plenty of opportunities, or we have quite some opportunities with the new calls. And luck is not under our control, but what you can do and what you must do to be successful is really get prepared well. If we can help you, we're going to be very happy to have you among our partners. If you have questions or specific observations that we can address now, let me switch off the screen so that I can see eventually the question in the chat. So we still have 10 minutes, and I would like to dedicate these 10 minutes to answer questions if there are. So let me check. Is there a way to predict which calls will have less competition, maybe based on past submission year after year? I think there is not a scientifically valid way to do that. Especially nowadays, in which with Gen AI, everybody feels like, you know, by generating some blah blah, they can submit everywhere. But definitely, if you look at the statistics of some specific calls, you will see that there are much less proposals submitted, and it's either because of the type of project. So coordination and support actions are a type of project which will not allow you to do research. So typically for this kind of calls, there are much less submissions. But of course, it's very specific work that is about coordinating and supporting the ecosystems. So scientists, technologists might not at all be interested in this kind of activities. Innovation actions are also an instrument in which the profitable organizations, so SMEs and industry players, have to put on the table 30% of the cost. So the commission only refund 70% of your cost. Therefore, we have noticed that there are less submissions for innovation actions. Of course, if you are a non-for-profit organization, then you don't care and you can go to anyone, or if you have anyway this 30%. There are also some calls that are more prescriptive. They are very prescriptive in terms of the competences that are needed on board. So if you don't have, I mean, sometimes if it's very specific use cases, if it's very specific technologies, like also at hardware or materials level, you don't have many people or many organizations that can do that work in Europe. And therefore, typically there are less submissions. So that's the kind of aspects that you can take into account. Then, so I hope, Henry, I gave you a satisfactory answer. Now I see David said, if evaluators use AI to summarize and evaluate proposal, aren't they exposing consortium IP as well? Yes, if they don't use licensed tools that do not share the knowledge that they share. So yes, the answer is yes. Can you know which specific tools are they using for evaluation? No, because I guess that this is very much out of control. In former times, I've been evaluator for many years, we were all in Place Roger in some rooms together with paper, with our paper copies, and there you could be sure that, the evaluation was done according to specific criteria and procedures. Nowadays, most of the evaluations are done remotely. And the way in which the evaluations are done, it's much less controllable. So I don't know which tools they would be using. I suspect they would be using some of them, unfortunately, the free available ones, because it's a cost that maybe not every evaluator, because as an evaluator, you operate as an individual, not as an organization. So as an individual, I don't know how many of these evaluators would have professional licenses. I hope most of them, but yeah, that's a question. Then Katya says, so through the 48-hour danger zone, absolutely. There's like a sort of craziness, and this is something, I don't know if I should share that, but sometimes I tell my colleagues, this is the moment in which democracy stops to exist. because you have to make sure that there is one person or one team of 2 or 3 people that take over the process and take control over the process, because otherwise you risk really to mess up things in the very last moment. So there's always ways to keep involved all the consortium, but you have to secure the submission. So it's when, I think in the last 2-3 days, we always have one offline copy that we work on for submission, and we have an online copy in parallel that the partners, that the consortium can contribute to. So I recommend you to do the same. Now, please give more details of describing impact, what kind of impact you are, what are. So here, Dalia, I would say impacts, I mentioned before, you should have a look at the call text, at the destination. In the work program, you will see that your calls belong to a given destination, and the impacts usually are listed there. And otherwise, you can always refer to the Horizon Europe KPIs. But clearly, there might be some cases. It happened in the past. I don't remember if it happened in 2026, but in some cases it happened that impacts were not specified in the destinations. Then, of course, what it's important is that you keep clear in mind that for each specific proposal, there might be impact at several levels. And it's important that you touch upon all the levels, whether it's scientific, economic, social, environmental, but impact can mean different things depending on the proposal and depending on the kind of results and work that you're going to undertake. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Petra. I think, yes, I would like to say that the slides, with some more slides also that I didn't have time to present today, will be put online. If you are registered to this workshop, you will receive an email with a link, I guess, to download them. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact us. And also, if you have useful input or useful learning that maybe we didn't capture, it would be very interesting for us to learn very much. So thanks again. I see an observation from Giovanni. In 2026, many destinations have no more specific impact bullet list, so one must derive the chosen impact from the overall text. Indeed, again, less prescriptive than before. Very correct, Giovanni. So I think we will close this webinar. Thanks for joining. Thank you for listening, and also to pass on the message. And I hope that we can work together in some proposal in the future. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.